Welcome to today's The CIO's Guide to Beating Ransomware and Staying Available webinar. And throughout this, all participants will be in listen-only mode, and after there'll be a question and answer session. However, please feel free to post questions at any point via the Q&A box on the presentation. And it's now my pleasure to pass you over to Nick Ismail, reporter for The Information Age. Please begin.
Thank you. On Information Age, I'm delighted to welcome you to this live webinar on the CIO's Guide on how to beat ransomware while staying available. We're looking forward to a great session revealing how ransomware has evolved, how it will impact you, and how you can stay available during and after an attack. Ransomware has dominated the threat landscape in recent years, heavily distributed via phishing emails, compromised websites, or malicious ads. Its distribution has increased by 267% between June and November 2016. Last month, this rise of ransom-based malware culminated in the biggest ever ransomware cyber attack. WannaCry infected organizations across the globe, including many NHS trusts across the UK. This attack served as a huge wake-up call to not only those organizations affected, but governments as well. It certainly brought the issue of ransomware into national conversation. While malware authors mostly rely on ransomware to make the bulk of their revenues, ad fraud is a growing problem and botnets continue to become a huge threat. Internet of Things devices in particular are increasingly a low-hanging fruit for threat actors. They're often poorly secured with default passwords or security flaws that are rarely patched by their owners. This year, as seen with WannaCry, ransomware is becoming even more aggressive, and this problem will continue to grow unless fragile legacy systems are updated and there is a greater emphasis placed on fostering a culture of security within organizations. At the same time, laws need to be introduced to force manufacturers to make IoT devices more secure out of the box to hinder the size of dangerous botnets. Today's webinar will present how businesses can stay ahead of cyber criminals in the current and future threat landscape and what actions they can take to both prevent and respond to ransomware attacks. Most importantly, how to stay available in the event of an attack. There are white papers available for you to download for free, so please take advantage of them. And throughout the webinar, you feel free to ask any questions and we'll hopefully get round to them at the end of the presentation. Without further ado, I'd like to invite our expert speaker today. Rick Vanover's wealth of IT experience includes system administration and IT management, with virtualization being the central theme of his career recently. He is the Director of Technical Product Marketing and Evangelism for Veeam Software. Over to you, Rick.
Cheers, Nick, and a warm welcome to everyone attending this very serious topic. Nick's comments about the state of ransomware are real. Here at Veeam, sponsors of this webinar, we deal with it every day, and we've taken this very seriously, and we have some practical tips for people of all types that we're going to cover here today. So really, I think this is a primitive statement, but we all will agree that there's really no manual mode anymore. We all have had some form of digital transformation in our digital lives and our IT services that we use. Any type of industry really has an expectation that there is a seamless digital experience to enable this digital life, whether it be a work life or a personal life. There's a pretty significant expectation. And we really have an issue with the brand of the business that we run, each of our individual technology responsibilities, that if something is not available, there is a significant risk and impact and potential downstream consequences to a brand, a bottom line, and more if you're not available. And, with or without ransomware being the problem, these are kind of primitive risks that go with running IT services today. And they're almost made worse with this ransomware situation. And we've actually qualified some of this in the form of a data point, which is one of the takeaways you can have from this webinar, by the way, but I've summarized a couple of very interesting things. So we've surveyed a number of organizations, including many in the UK, that we really wanted to qualify, and these are not Veeam customers, by the way, but we wanted to identify if the organizations have what they need technology-wise to keep things available and meet the expectations of their business. What I'm getting at is the business might expect things to be available within, I don't know, an hour, 15 minutes, something like that. But there might be only capabilities in regards to backup and storage and data center technologies that can't quite meet that expectation. 82% of organizations we surveyed actually admit that the backup tools, the infrastructure, the systems they have cannot meet the expectation. And that's really interesting because we are in a digitally transformed world. There's high expectations of data. Of course, Veeam can help you there. I'm not going to take this webinar to show you that. But I do think it's important to identify, or at least even in your own organization, take an assessment. What does your business expect of your data services? How available do they expect it to be? What are your capabilities in there? Now, if there's downtime of any type, it can be pretty significant in that it can be costly. It can cost money, brand reputation. You might lose a new deal. Whatever it is you're doing, downtime can significantly impact the bottom line. And those costs, these numbers that we've tracked in this report, these numbers have gone up year over year. So it's pretty primitive to understand that downtime is expensive. We all get that. But it also, we've, in our survey, identified that a number of these other types of negative attributes happen with downtime. And everything from employees to the customer, everybody loses when it comes to downtime. Now, that's all good, but we also have to remember that this is in the middle of that digital transformation. So we all have a kind of a primitive digital transformation, but we all could also agree that we're not done with that. And we have additional data points that say there's more digital transformation happening, and then the availability part of it is still not going to be able to keep up with it. And of course, Veeam can help you there, but we're in the middle of this very interesting time where we have a lot of dependency on our digital technologies to do whatever it is we do, and we're going into the category of more of that, and then we have this risk of not being available. Pretty interesting points here. Now, this report you can download, the QR code right there. I do believe it's part of the follow-up kit that you will get for this webinar, and it's also one of the takeaways, I think, on the on the little side widget of the Adobe Connect here. But that being said, it's all good. Staying available is fine, and it's great, but you can put it all at risk immediately when ransomware strikes. And one little stat I'll throw out here is that Veeam deals with this every day. Our tech support team fields calls every day regarding ransomware, and this is globally, not just in EMEA or North America, globally. And the thought is, this is an important statistic from my perspective because this tells me that ransomware is not just a PC problem. This can also be a data center problem as well, because all of the cases that we get are in the data center. So think about that. It's not just a PC problem. Now, ransomware, Nick started with a really great example. In fact, someone in my team was not able to go to NHS the day that WannaCry hit. In fact, he tumbled on his ankle, and he wasn't able to get into the clinic, by the way. He told me that story because the clinic was closed. Think about that. You're not able to get your health care. He turned out fine. Don't worry about that. It was just a quick look at his leg. But when we look at what is ransomware, it can hit you a number of different ways, but it's basically a cryptovirology. It is meant to lock you out of data, and it comes in a number of different ways. It'll hit file paths, data paths, and there's many, many types. In fact, when my support team does their presentation of these things, there's the famous ones that have hit the news, but they have this long list of other ones that I've not heard of, and it's pretty significant how many different types of ransomware are out there. And the primitive assumption here is that this encrypted data is worth enough to these individuals that they're going to pay money to get it back. And, that's basically how it works. But a couple of statistics here is that some of these, decrypting costs are over $1 million US, which is crazy. In the United States, HIPAA, which is a authority on healthcare data, basically considers this as a loss of data control. from like an audit perspective, that's like a really bad thing, and it is a bad thing. You really don't have access to your data. And, we'd say that half of all businesses in the United States have had some form of ransomware situation, which is really powerful. In fact, a lot of times I will do a presentation and ask for a show of hands. How many of us have had some sort of ransomware situation? I don't want any more details like, did you lose data? Did you have to pay money? I don't want to put people on the spot for that. It's shocking how many people will raise their hand. Now, it could be PC, could have been their mom, who knows? But it's very prevalent today. Additionally, they're working on different segments, targets, locations, and different platforms. It's not just a Windows problem. There are notable examples on Android, on iPhones. I saw a smart TV get encrypted, by the way. WannaCry was immediately followed up with SambaCry for Linux. Okay, so these are, this vector, these trajectories are working every direction and every type of technology. It's really serious in my opinion. Additionally, I don't have any positive outlook other than to invest in resiliency and availability because I only see this growing, and any security professional will agree with you there that it is something that is not going to organically fix itself. It's not going to go away. So when you have this combination of a broad digital transformation, it's not done. We're still going to continue digitally transforming, yet we have this explosive risk when it comes to our data. We have this opportunity to really have a pretty grim forecast. So that's when we want to transition to prevention and response. Now, I'll be right up front. Prevention, number one thing, user training. You've got to have people understand what they're doing. Email attachments, websites, downloadable things, those types of things are the number one prevention defense technique. Then on the response side, that's where I have most of my expertise and my role here at Veeam and my global team that works on a number of different things. But it's important to note that if ransomware gets inside of your organization, the only way out is to either restore or consciously lose that data. You have to really put your mindset around that. You can't fix this. So I like to invest on both ends, prevention, user training, that type of stuff. Have the tools in regards to response, and that's where Veeam can help you. So here, some real practical takeaways here. That user training, number one, very, very important. And if you look at how these incidents start, it usually does start by an end user attachment, a download, those types of things. Proactiveness, definitely ensure that we have that prevention ahead of time, and there's a whole market, by the way, of tools that will content scan and that type of stuff. I have really a lot of experience in this third point here of investing in the availability strategy. So my logic here is like if/when ransomware gets in, you need to be able to get out of that problem. So even if those first two bits fail, this next one is the last line. And anyone who's been through a ransomware situation, they can't tell their story without using the word backup. So I think that you want to not get into a point where you have to consciously decide to lose data in the way of not getting it back. That's even scarier. It's one thing to lose data in terms of a recovery point. You're having to go back in time. That's a whole separate discussion, but that's a lot more palatable than complete loss of data. And then I think it's also, this last recommendation is my secret weapon here, and that's the data flow. We live in a complex world of data centers and systems. I'll agree with that. Challenge your teams, challenge yourself if you're a practicing IT pro to know how data flows. You might know an application, but what does it talk to from a network and the internet and the end user standpoint? Where does the data sit? There are some, we had one support case where there was a ransomware that connected to Microsoft SQL Server, and it immediately made a call to encrypt the databases and then made a call to delete all the SQL Server agent jobs and those backups. that is scary. So it's locked you out of a database, not just files. So these types of things are pretty significant. So know where this data flow is. And then we've actually done our own poll. So the first availability report was more about availability in regards to the data center being available. But we did a very specific ransomware poll, and that was a mix of some Veeam customers, some not. But 46% of them admitted to this anonymous poll having some form of a ransomware incident. 91% of them had data encrypted with it. You take that one step further, we found that 2% of those people admitted to having to pay the ransom. Those groups were all small. They were less than 10,000 US dollars, which is good, all except one. And then 84% of them were able to restore without having to pay that ransom. Now, this is a number I'd like to see at 100%. You know, Veeam has some new products, especially on Windows, physical servers, laptops, et cetera, so we can help there. But just by the numbers, those are some interesting data points in my opinion. Now, what does this information tell us? Well, it tells us that we need to be resilient against ransomware. In fact, I myself and my team globally, we have taken this ransomware challenge very seriously. And we have basically we call it a series of papers, but this short URL, this will take you right to a set of content that we've done to help people be resilient, everything from more advanced configurations with Veeam and other technologies to be resilient against ransomware, to how to leverage what you have, like especially if you have any smart storage systems, that type of stuff. So I encourage you to check that out. Now here's another modern risk, and this actually is right out of our backup forum for one of our products. And the title says it all. Yes, ransomware can delete your Veeam backup. So we're even seeing ransomware aware of Veeam data types. So this is basically a ransomware that will go and delete the file types associated with Veeam or encrypt them. But it looks like in this case it was deleted, which actually it kind of makes sense because it's usually a big file. It's a lot more CPU intensive to encrypt it than it would be a lot easier to just delete it. So what do we do with this risk, right? Well, that's where I want to implement some practical tips. You get into a situation where you have two options. You either pay the ransom or you lose the data. And both of them are bad, actually. What I think we should actually do is, this is another way of kind of asking this question of, what do you do? Do you pay now or you pay later? I think you actually pay now. And what I mean by that is you don't even want to get into a situation of having to make a choice between these two. What you and I, as IT professionals and CIOs and network administrators and people like in my role when I advise organizations on how to configure, invest now in your availability strategy so that you don't get to a situation where you have to decide. So these are really unfortunate outcomes. So my guidance is to implement this notion of availability. Design in a way where you have these capabilities like business continuity, you have service agility, you have compliance and visibility. These are benefits that nobody's going to say no to. But this enables the broader digital transformation. But if you put techniques in place that give you resiliency against ransomware, you will then be more equipped on all ends to help you get to a more digitally transformed environment, to keep it available, to be resilient against ransomware. I mean, ransomware is much more scary than a user randomly deleting a file. And if I had to give you one recommendation, above all, believe it or not, for being resilient against ransomware, and I have basically two recommendations. This is the first one, offline storage, and this next one's visibility I'll talk about in a second. But this offline storage requirement is the number one most effective way to be resilient against ransomware. And let me explain this. Offline meaning it's not being read from or written to. Propagation is characteristic of ransomware where they will take a data set and carry on and encrypt or delete and just keep going to whatever it can see. So the number one most effective form of offline storage is tape. I will admit this is 2017 and everyone has a story of how tape has let them down, but you cannot discredit the offline characteristic of tape. Additionally, the portability and the acquisition costs are pretty good for tape. And it's completely offline unless it's being read from or written to. Now, I also have identified 4 other, what I would call semi-offline types of storage. Now, these are really less offline than tape, but I understand some organizations just might not be able to implement tape, and 2017 isn't really a good time to start with tape. But if you look at these other technologies like replicated virtual machines, primary storage snapshots, Veeam Cloud Connect, that's a specific Veeam technology, or rotating media, these have either different authentication mechanisms or they are, using my language, semi-offline. So a replicated virtual machine is powered off, but you have to make sure that these ransomware situations would not propagate into a VMware or a Hyper-V host and start encrypting or deleting virtual machines. I mean, this is layers upon layers that you have to think about. Again, that data flow. Think about some of these different characteristics and how you can build for more resiliency. And then kind of my second requirement that I'd like to highlight is this notion of visibility. And visibility is really critical. And it could be what I would call a non-systematic approach, which is that notion of understanding one's data flow. And I think that when you think about data flow, it can be even authentication flow. In fact, authentication is probably the best way to prevent propagation of ransomware. And I'll give you a specific example. In one of the papers I wrote about this, a lot of times people want to be more resilient against ransomware, but if you had to do one thing, and it doesn't involve buying more storage or signing up for a cloud subscription or spending any money, but if you had to do one thing to be more resilient, that would be use different authentication from data zone to data zone, meaning where systems and data live and run, you have one username or multiple usernames and passwords associated with that. How you back it up uses a different password. How you store it from a backup storage perspective as well uses yet a different password. So you can actually use different usernames and passwords without even encouraging any new cost. So have visibility into what authentication is used, what types of file systems are used, and the more transitions between authentication and file systems and storage types that you have, those are positive characteristics to being more resilient. And some of those don't even involve additional costs. But this notion of visibility is more than just knowing the data flow. It's also having visibility into suspicious behavior. Now, this is one area that Veeam has actually created a alarm where we are seeing ransomware activity, or what we call possible ransomware activity. And there's a lot of ways you can do this. In fact, even if you don't have Veeam 1, do you have a mechanism to have visibility to a lot of CPU and a lot of disk writes? This is a characteristic associated with this type of software, malware, I should say. But basically, this is an example where you can have some capabilities around visibility into that behavior and have some resiliency against ransomware should it show up in your organization. And this is just part of it. There's also the detection side that, again, that's not, specifically, or I should say the prevention on the inbound. Veeam doesn't have like content filtering on that inside of it. But multiple steps down the way, having that visibility, so this would indicate that ransomware is inside. Do you have visibility forward at the network level, those types of things? Have we invested in user training? Have we identified all the users we need to train? That's actually a visible activity as well. Now, just a quick look at what this might look like. This is a sample here, this possible ransomware activity alarm right here. This is not one you want to see, but basically what we're looking for, high write rates, high CPU. Now, I would love to have this alarm come up, I don't know, 20 times as a false positive instead of just once as an actual positive. And the logic here is maybe my SQL Server DBA does something that might trigger this. Great, that's fine. At least I know it's legitimate. But the moment this type of thing happens on a different data system like the file server, this is not a good place to see this, right? So this type of visibility is really important, and it's kind of interesting. When you have this type of alarm, you're actually walking into a situation where you have a little bit better overall visibility into what goes on in your applications. Now, this is something that applies, specifically to system admins, network operators, those type that support many different applications from an infrastructure perspective, but they may or may not know specifically what goes on these applications. So this is visibility, I think, that everyone can enjoy. Now, if you've not heard of Veeam, this is some of the points and the thoughts of how we think, right? We've taken this availability experience pretty seriously. We have invested a lot in the backup space. A lot of times people know about Veeam as backup for VMware, backup for Hyper-V, but we've actually expanded quite a bit. We have this broader form vision that we call the Veeam Availability Platform, and we want to take this availability experience, which includes being resilient against ransomware. We want to take this availability experience to the cloud. We want to take it to a service provider. We want to take it to mobile PCs and laptops and servers in the data center, physical servers, or workloads on alternate hypervisors. And our newest products are now available for the non-virtualized Windows and Linux systems. But if you've heard of Veeam, it's been one of those things where we've changed over the years, especially with our new products. And we are here to help organizations be resilient against ransomware. We're helping organizations be more generally available. And just a brief note, business perspective, we're now 11 years old, believe it or not. Whoops. And we have over, this animation, I apologize, animation wasn't working as expected. We have over 242,000 customers worldwide, which is a big step. And we have around 2,700 employees now, and a global company with a large presence in the UK, and our global headquarters is outside of Zurich. And, again, if you've not heard of Veeam, I encourage you to check us out at veeam.com. So we have a couple of free tools that'll help you immediately be more available, but even just have that visibility. In fact, I'll go right to this second one here, Veeam 1 for monitoring and alerting. This can be a free product. I guarantee you that Veeam 1 will tell you something about your environment that you didn't know, but you need to fix. So you might want to check that out. And all of this starts at veeam.com, and our two newest products, Veeam Agent for Linux and Veeam Agent for Microsoft Windows, those are free and available at veeam.com as well. So with that, I want to turn it over to Nick. Looks like we got quite a few questions queued up here.
Hi there. Thanks for that, Rick. Yes, we do have quite a few questions. So first one, what do you mean that if ransomware gets in, backup is the only way out?
Yeah, so what I mean by that is if you have ransomware, you either consciously have to decide to turn that system off and actively lose that data, or restore from backup. This is, and that is actually based on a primitive assumption, not to pay the ransom. Security experts analysts are consistently recommending not pay the ransom. This is a fundamental stance that at least I'm suggesting everyone take in that space, and that's kind of the spirit of what I mean. You have to restore from backup.
And in light of that, the next question, so what is your recommendation? Is it to pay or not to pay the ransom? Is there any guarantee the hackers will actually release the data?
Yeah, good point. I don't think Bitcoin's return policy is very customer friendly. So, no, my recommendation is not to pay the ransom, but my recommendation is broader. Pay now or pay later. Pay now. Invest in availability. Get offline storage. Get more complex passwords and usernames and security zones and data flows. Invest now. So pay now, because if you're going to your business asking for money to be more resilient against ransomware, you can have a much better chance of getting a yes and keeping one's job than, hey, I need money to pay this ransom. This is just not a good situation to be in. So pay now by investing in your resiliency strategy so that you don't have to pay later.
Okay. And so why is ransomware, do you think, the most common form of malware?
Well, there's money involved now, and there's a lot of money. I think that I saw a stat somewhere that tracked how much money that WannaCry actually got, and it actually wasn't that much, but it's enough to make headlines. It's enough to divert attention. It's enough to keep my mate out of the clinic. Okay, so there's money involved. There's personal safety. There's healthcare involved. I think that this is a very broad impacting technology trend, and I think that's why it's so significant in that regard.
Right, and following the WannaCry attack, are hackers reverting to old attack vectors to stump organizations?
Possibly. I know they're getting smarter, and they are trying new data sources. They're trying new ways in. There's very little consistency in how these different ransomwares behave and come in, other than the end result is consistent of having to pay to get out. So yes and no, both to that question.
Okay, and another one here. What is the best way to ensure competent user training as a method of prevention?
Well, that's a good question. So just back to basics. Attachments, handling, processes with that. Is it a known source? Do you enable macros of everything, that type of thing? Those are the simple list of most effective ways to address that user training. And then also, you could probably find plenty of stuff on the internet of how to, there's probably somebody, this is a really good idea for me, maybe make a YouTube video on, the basics of what, you should and should not do regarding attachments and in the current climate of this threatscape. But there's got to be resources out there, but a little bit of common sense to start with.
Okay, and in terms of email, should a sort of email level security be integrated into an organization's operation?
That's a good start. A funny thing, I actually use a lot of webmail. It kind of sounds antiquated, but that's kind of in one regard a pretty good start to being resilient and possibly a little bit more separated from the riskscape. But it depends on a lot of different organizations at that point.
Okay, another one. Does a business become more vulnerable to ransomware in the cloud?
The cloud can absolutely be part of a resiliency strategy for one, and it depends on what we're doing with the cloud. First of all, just cloud for cloud's sake is not necessarily more resilient. But the example of holding backups in the cloud with something like Veeam Cloud Connect is a really good example because it uses a completely different authentication framework. It's completely abstracted storage. So right off the bat, there's two ways of being resilient by that regard.
Okay, and a last question here. What is the future of ransomware, Rick, in terms of attacks and prevention?
Well, in terms of attacks, I'm going to, I would speculate there will be more and more advanced and incubation. This is one thing I'm kind of thinking about in my next chapter of the paper here, the series that I've been writing, and that's the ones that are just incubating. And then the other side of that is we as IT professionals are not going to be able to, say I'm done being prepared. This is a continuous cycle that we're going to have to be resilient against. So this is the proverbial work in process.
Great, and I'm sorry, Rick, we actually have one more. Do ransomware attack Veeam backup files? If so, how do you avoid them from being accessible?
Yeah, I see that question. So there was that one forum example where ransomware did go after Veeam's file types. So what I recommend, first of all, is having separate authentication, having isolated storage, and then additionally offline storage like tape. And in that regard, you're a lot more resilient against that. But the worst thing one can do, and this question also addresses ACLs, but the one thing that you should not do is have one username and password for everything, from domain administrator down to service account, using that same account, to how the backups are moved, and that's what we used to talk to VMware Hyper-V, and that's where the backups go. That broad form all-access account becomes an incredible conduit for ransomware. So that's the worst thing you could do. But check out the link of papers I have, the ransomware series papers, and I have some very specific Veeam tips in that document, and I'm actually working on the second chapter of that this week. So we'll see that go up next month.
Okay, great. And unless there are any more questions, I'd like to thank you, Rick, for a really insightful webinar, and thank you to the participants. I hope you found it really interesting and worthwhile. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you and have a good rest of the day, everyone.